Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Steelers mock draft tracker video live at Mike's Beer Bar, by Brian Batko, our Steelers insider. It is the Friday before, we're recording this on the Friday before the draft, testing out our setup for our live stream that's going to be at Mike's Beer Bar on Thursday, April 24th, Friday, April 25th for the first three rounds of the NFL draft. Love to have you come on down and join us on draft night if you can. But otherwise, please tune in for that. We're really excited to, come to you again. We did it last year down here. Had a great experience with everyone at Mike's.
And Paul Skeen's jersey is dropping off some food right now to some people, and it looks amazing. So I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, you can get your steak on a stone, hundreds of beers on tap. No better place to spend the evening. But, Brian, we're going to talk about the final mocks that we're seeing all around the internet at the moment.
Coming down the home stretch.
It is coming down the home stretch, so we're excited to break that all down. I wanted to start with Shamar Stewart, Brian. I saw him in Mark Ross on NFL.com's mock draft this week. He's
former guest on Chip Tam and Football.
Yes.
So, friend of the show.
Yes.
Mark Ross, not Shemar Stewart. But
right. And Shemar Stewart feels like he's gotten a little bit lost, Brian. I think he was the first-round pick for Ray Fittipaldi's first mock draft.
He
was. Back in January.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of heady territory there because I think Broderick Jones had that distinction once upon a time, and we know he became a Steeler. I'm not sure who it was last year. I'm pretty sure Ray nailed Troy Fautanu in his final mock, so keep that in mind. But yeah, Shemar Stewart he had pole position in this mock draft season from Ray Fittipaldi.
He did, and then we ended up talking a lot more about Derrick Harmon, Walter Nolen, Kenneth Grant is kind of that holy trinity of defensive tackle guys the Steelers might be looking at. Yeah. I think Stewart fell off for a lot of people, Brian, because of the pass rush statistics. Only 3.5 sacks in his college career. But if you look, Pro Football Focus had him, I think, as the sixth best edge defender against the run in the entire country. So what's your read on Shemar Stewart and whether he belongs in this conversation? Because I'll throw this other nugget in there. He also was one of the visitors to the Southside facility. Derrick Harmon was. Kenneth Grant was not. And Walter Nolen was not. So I don't know if you put any stock in that and how the Steelers might regard him compared to those other two.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to put a little bit of stock into it, but it could also, as much of it's an indicator of interest in him from the Steelers, it could be an indicator of some questions that they have about him, primarily some of that positional fit that you bring up there, Adam. And he should be one of the best run defenders on the edge in this class because, I mean, he was listed at 6'5", 280 last year at A&M. He showed up at the Combine 267 and then completely crushed it. I think he ran like a 4.67 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, which is literally, in everything he did with the jumps and all the athletic testing, was literally one of the best Combine performances ever by a player that size or larger. So that's what you're looking at with Shemar Stewart. And the Steelers, I think if you had to pigeonhole him into one area, they would call him an outside linebacker. I mean, that's kind of the Bud Dupree body type that they've gone after in the past. But with the amount of sub packages that they play, you're reducing down to two down linemen. They probably wanted to ask him and get a feel for, hey, could you play with your hand on the ground? Can you be one of the two guys up front with a Cam Hayward or Keanu Benton, and we can let you get after the passer because TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith or Nick Herbig are screaming off the edges. So he's got the size and the frame for that. Can he do that at the NFL level? I think that's what a lot of teams want to see. But even more so, the production questions with Stewart are why you see some people mocking him in the top 10 for those physical traits, and you see some people saying he's going to fall below the Steelers at 21 overall because he did have 4.5 sacks in his college career, 1.5 each of the last 3 seasons, so at least he's consistent.
He did generate a lot of pressures, though. I think the number was 39, and he reminded me a little bit of Chop Robinson from Penn State this time last year. Obviously, we weren't talking about him as much from a Steelers perspective, but in doing the Penn State podcast, that was the biggest question about Chop Robinson. I think he only had 4 sacks in his final year with the Nittany Lions, but translates to 6 sacks in his rookie season with the Dolphins.
Very different players, right? Because Chop was on the smaller side for an edge rusher, whereas Shemar Stewart is kind of supersized and might be a positionless player if he were to go to an odd front like the Steelers. I do, just in a vacuum, Adam, think he'd probably fit best as your typical 4-3 defensive end in playing that way. So maybe he does land with one of those teams, but it is somewhat intriguing that the Steelers wanted to bring him to the South Side, wanted to use one of those 30 visits to learn a little bit more about the guy who, I don't know if they call him the Menace or he calls himself the Menace or both, but it does speak to how hard he plays and the havoc that he can wreak when he's out there.
Yeah, and I think for me, the Chop Robinson comparison maybe isn't so much in how he, how they play, but it's like that you can come back from that at the college level of not
having the traditional
well.
Counting stats of sacks. Yes.
Yeah, I think he can come back from that.
I'll just say this on Stewart, if we're wrapping up on him. I don't think he's even going to be there at 21 when the Steelers pick. I think one of those teams in the top 20 are going to be way too enticed by the physical attributes that he brings to the table. And if you're the Steelers, like, you got to look at every player as their own prospect separately. But I do get a little bit reminded of another Texas A&M defensive end from a few years ago who they did invest in, granted a third-round pick, DeMarvin Leal, who was also a big-time high school recruit, was a pretty good athlete for his size, but didn't exactly have a natural scheme fit in the NFL. Was he a DN? Is he an outside linebacker? Is he a D tackle? And as we know, injuries have played into it too. Maybe some conditioning stuff, but he has not carved out a role thus far in Pittsburgh.
Also makes it difficult for Shamar Stewart that he's not the only defensive line Shamar in this draft from Texas A&M. You got Shemar Turner.
They even
as well.
spell it the same. What are the chances of that? If I were one of them, I'd have been like, I think I need to come out next year just so we don't get a duplicate situation here. But in all seriousness, Shemar Turner, a little bigger, a little bulkier, and you're probably looking at more of a 2nd through 4th round pick there with him.
Yes. So I actually had Shemar Turner written down here on the script.
I just think if you're trying to predict, maybe I'll do this when I turn in my final mock draft 7th round for the Steelers, but I should just say, like, the Steelers are going to pick Shemar from Texas A&M, and I'm at least doubling my chances of getting a pick right.
Yeah, you did draft. I believe the Friday episode of the North Shore Drive, you had your fantasy draft with Chris. You should have tried that loophole.
I should have, yeah. I should have tried that on Carter. Yeah, I'm going with Shemar from A&M, the D lineman.
Brian, another name I wanted to ask you about, Dylan Sampson, the running back from Tennessee, came up in a couple multi-round mocks this week. I think it was Kyle Krabs of the 33rd team. I believe Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him. And then I think it was either Chris or Ray also had Dylan Sampson.
I'll just be honest with you. I have not looked at Chris and Ray's full mocks, not because I don't like them or I think they're bad at their jobs, but I don't want them to color my eventual selections. Now, sometimes you're on the website and you see the player who's the thumbnail image for the story. So I think I'm pretty sure I know who Ray picked, but I try to just silo myself off a little bit till I turn in the final predictions.
That's fair.
But you can still mention it. I'm not too worried about spoilers.
No, yeah, and Dylan Sampson is he rushed for a lot of yards at Tennessee. He averaged, I think, over 7 yards a carry. So was a home run threat for the Volunteers.
He's an alumnus of the Brian Batko college football fantasy team as well. I know I've mentioned that championship club on here before in the past, and it always becomes more relevant come mock draft time because I've had a lot of these guys. And Sampson was on my team last year, and he was an absolute stud, guaranteed 20-plus points every week.
Does he stand out from the pack for you for that reason with this group they're trying to build with Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell? Because they had I think they had 9 running backs. Omarion Hampton was the only one I think that's really projected to go in the first round. And all these other guys are going to be later round options, probably going to be on the board in that 3rd round at number 83. So how do you maybe separate him from the pack, and why do you think we're seeing that reflected in some of these multi-round mocks?
That being said, no, he does not really stand out from the pack for me. And he was one of the first running backs to visit the Steelers here in the pre-draft process for, whatever that's worth, maybe nothing. But, he was really good last year at Tennessee. I think the issue that I have with Sampson is he's more of a well-rounded back. And I just think the Steelers already kind of have that in Jalen Warren. They also already have kind of the smaller, shiftier pass-catching back in Kenneth Gainwell. So when I ranked the pre-draft visitors on the website this week, I think that went live Friday morning. I'm going to pull that up as we sit here at Mike's. Dylan Sampson was kind of the last guy that I had in the glut of running backs below Omarion Hampton I had in his own tier. Travion Henderson from Ohio State and Caleb Johnson from Iowa I had in their own tier. And then the next kind of group down I just called running back central, because it's hard to separate Ollie Gordon II from DJ Giddens or Bashal Tootin from RJ Harvey. They all came to the South Side, so we know the Steelers have some degree of wanting to learn more about them. But I had Sampson at the bottom because 5'8", 199, he's the smallest of them all. I think his 40 time didn't compare that favorably with most of those guys. So if they didn't have their running back room constructed the way it currently is, I'd be pounding the table more for just a good, solid player. With what they already have here, I think someone who's more of a burner or more of a bigger body would make a little bit more sense for the Steelers.
Interesting. Yeah, Sampson also was not super high on my radar until I think he showed up 3 times this week. And there's not a ton of multi-round mocks out there in any given week. So when you see the same name multiple times, it starts to
well, it makes sense because he visited, and he is a good player. He was really productive last year for the Vols. So I think wherever he lands, he'll be fine. But I just think there are other guys who make more sense for the Steelers and what they need.
Brian, let's get into quarterbacks. People love to talk quarterbacks. We got to briefly touch on it before maybe.
I'm open to anything but attached to nothing when it comes to the Steelers and the quarterbacks in this draft, Adam. Let me put it that way.
Well, I want to ask maybe a bigger level of how these guys are trending in mocks unrelated to the Steelers.
So 4.46 40 for Dylan Sampson. So I probably sold him a little bit short, but still, some of the other guys like Tootin, Jaden Blue, they ran faster than that. Yeah.
But in terms of the quarterbacks, Brian, I think we're seeing Jaxson Dart and some starting to climb ahead of Shedeur Sanders for the QB2 in this class, but then he's still dropping into the second round entirely. And how do you see the way things are? Because obviously Shedeur Sanders is going down, Jaxson Dart is going up. Where is the equilibrium for those two guys overall in your mind? Kind of remove the Steelers from this. How do you think they're regarded as prospects? And do you look at the volatility? Because that's when I get to the stage of the draft process and there's still such disparate opinions about a guy.
Yeah.
To me, that reminds me, and we've said it before on the show, I'm sure we'll say it many times before we get to draft night, that it just reminds me of that Kenny Pickett year where you had 5 or 6 names that were getting connected to any teams in the first round, and then only Kenny Pickett gets picked before the third.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Steelers learning from that 2022 draft class, but you got to think a lot of the NFL is also trying to take instruction from how badly that class has flamed out now 3 years later, because it is often compared to this current group. And, I remember back in that year, they didn't even have a Cam Ward at the top. I mean, Kenny was the closest thing to that. But you saw prominent people ranking Matt Corral first among that group. You saw prominent people saying Malik Willis is worth a shot from that group. So, this year, the Dart Sanders, jockeying for QB2 position. I ultimately think it's going to kind of depend on who between, 3 and 21, the Steelers included here, is that interested in a quarterback, and then what do they make of that player? I think somebody is going to bet on the moxie from Shedeur Sanders and kind of the intangibles, the playmaking ability, and let's not mince words. I mean, he's going to put butts in the seats. People are going to be curious to see that guy play, whether it goes great or whether it goes terribly. I think he's going to land 9th overall in New Orleans. The Saints need a quarterback even more with this latest Derrick Carr buzz. So I think that's where he goes. I don't think Jaxson Dart rockets up past him. But, with Dart, then where does he land? Obviously, the Steelers could be that team. They could be interested, or they could have had that pre-draft meeting to check boxes and say, nah, we don't think so. Not in the first round, at least. We are going to learn our lesson from a few years ago. If he doesn't go to Pittsburgh, might not be a first rounder. Could a team like the Rams say we need the succession plan from Matthew Stafford and he'd be great in the Sean McVay offense? Possibly. It's just very tough to see, because quarterback play it's the most scrutinized of any position in any draft, and matters of arm strength and accuracy and pocket presence, they're so subjective, and that's why you're going to get different pundits and analysts weighing in so much differently on these guys.
Well, I've also heard people say about Jaxson Dart that he's got people running a nice PR campaign for him, a nice Oscar.
Whoever told him to play quarterback with the last name Dart also did him a lot of favors at a young age, so that's also great for him. But yeah, I mean, you've got Coach Prime's son, and then you've got Guy named Dart, who's got like the one eye black thing on, and he's got the headband and all that. And he seems like a pretty swaggy guy for the most part. Needless to say, they're both, more probably franchise QB, face of the team types than the Will Howards or Quinn Ewers or Tyler Shucks when you look down the board. Doesn't mean they're better players or going to be better players.
But do you think that's part of it with Jaxson Dart, is that that he's gotten in the right people's ears, and that's why you see? I mean, I've seen him as high as 3.
No, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, hey, I don't know.
think it will either, but I wonder whose ears his representation has gotten in and that type of stuff.
Well, I can't speak to how he's fared in these interviews with teams, and maybe he gets up on the whiteboard and maybe he's diagramming plays and he's proving to decision makers, GMs, and coaches and scouts like, I'm more than just one read Lane Kiffin offense made me like Matt Corral a few years ago. I can fit into really any offense and system and scheme and still put up the numbers that I did, and I'm more athletic than maybe people give me credit for, although I always kind of answer that with, well, then you should have run the 40 at the Combine or your pro day if you truly want to leave no doubt there. So, I mean, Jaxson Dart, he's going to be kind of the Will Levis type in this draft. We know that Levis ended up slipping to the second round, but it kind of reminds me of how you were seeing that same groundswell of momentum of people at that time being like, well, maybe Levis goes second, third, or fourth. Maybe he goes above C.J. Stroud because of the powerful arm and the mobility. Those aren't the same qualities necessarily that Dart brings to the table, but it's just always what happens this time of year with the quarterback position.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting storyline for this draft, kind of regardless of the Steelers, is how did those different trends in the mock drafts end up settling in real life. Brian, I'm going to throw some depth defensive line names at you.
Alrighty.
Or maybe some of these tweeners that we're not quite sure. We were having that conversation with Stewart earlier, but Dane Brugler and Kyle Krabs, they had their multi-round mocks. That's partly what I'm referring to here. I think it was Jordan Phillips from Maryland was mocked to the Steelers in the 4th round. Elijah Roberts from SMU was in both Dane Brugler's mock and Kyle Krabs'. I think he had him in different rounds. He was in the 5th in one. I think he might have gone as high as the 4th in the other. But those are 2 names, and I'm going to throw 2 more at you.
Okay.
Jamaree Caldwell from Oregon and Ty Robinson. We talked a little bit last week on the show. If I told you that these were the best defensive linemen the Steelers were going to get out of this draft, let's just say they get a combination of 1 or 2 of those guys, what would you say?
Well, that meant that they probably did go quarterback in round 1, or they surprised with a wide receiver, or maybe a running back, Omarion Hampton, because he fell or something along those lines, or a Nick Eamon-Worry, or somebody that's really off the radar that they wanted to keep their interest in secretive. I still think you could justify it. I think these are all good players who could come in and help you right away, but you would be just inherently skewing more toward the likelihood of, this is another Keanu Benton type who's going to be good but not great, as opposed to we might be getting the next Cam Hayward, the guy who's going to take the torch and truly just wreck games up front for the next 5 to 10 years in the black and gold. So Ty Robinson's probably my favorite of that list of names that you read off. Jordan Phillips from Maryland. I know that Mike Tomlin's son hasn't played there in a few years, but I almost think he'll need an intervention if they draft another Maryland player. He should almost be put the Maryland players in the cupboard, lock it. It's like he might be the next Aaron Donald, but we can't do it. We can't go down that road again.
I think he's just got a good relationship with Mike Loxley down there.
And that too, yeah. I mean, it's almost like, okay, Jordan Phillips, he's got good size and he's really young. Maybe he will be an option, but we know they didn't bring him in either. They didn't bring Robinson in from Nebraska either. He's a little bit more on the svelte side. He was 6'6", 288, but I think he plays really hard, and he ran a great 40 if you believe in kind of the athletic traits transferring for D linemen at 4.83. So I think he can be really good. I think he's going to end up going in the 3rd round. He's a little bit older prospect. He's almost 24, 6th-year senior from the Cornhuskers. But Caldwell's like a completely different player coming out of Oregon because he's on the shorter side for sure, 6'2", 332. His backside should have its own zip code, Adam. He's humongous in the rear end. That could be good as a true kind of 2-gapping nose tackle if that's what the Steelers want. And then you bump Keanu Benton over to wreak a little bit more havoc from the end spot when you're in your base defense. So I'm looking at kind of, if you're not getting a Derrick, Harmon or Kenneth Grant type in the first round who can do it all, I'd look more for someone who's got kind of a specialty to them. And the beauty of Keanu Benton, even if he's not taking that great leap forward just yet for the Steelers, he's still versatile enough that you can kind of plug and play the best quality player that you draft and let Benton fill in around him, whether that's continuing to play head up on the center or, like I said, extending out more to that 3 technique.
Yeah, I think it's all about the intentionality with these guys who are not the do-it-all types, and if you can put them
if
in
you
a
were,
role
you'd be in the first
thrive
round for the
right,
most part.
exactly.
Now, Robinson, though, from Nebraska, why I like him is I do think he's someone who has a little bit more versatility versus Caldwell. You're talking kind of pure, zero tech. And Elijah Roberts from SMU, who they also brought in on a visit. I mean, he's a 3-4 D end all day with his body type, but really quick, forces a lot of fumbles, and he could give you some real pass rushing juice there.
Yeah, he's a solid player. It's just a question of how does he fit into the defense. And so, I agree with you. I'd be okay with all of those guys if you got the QB in the first round, if you got an Amari on Hampton. Maybe Jahdae Barron, I know, is still on some people's radars as a versatile piece that you could stick in the secondary as well. So if you go that way in the first round, it's just all about, what are your biggest needs and filling them with guys who do have maybe a little bit more specialty to them. Or maybe they just, I think maybe in Ty Robinson's case, he can do a lot of things, but maybe just can't do them as well as those guys going in the early rounds.
And there's probably not as much upside.
Right.
That's
right.
There's always the upside floor discussion that Mike Tomlin and his scouts are having.
Yeah, his best case scenario, he's one of those guys you say, that's a nice player.
Yeah.
Not nothing crazy, but he's a nice player. Another name Kyle Krabs brought up this week that stopped me in my tracks a little bit, Brian, was Noel Williams of Cal. I said I hadn't seen him connected to the Steelers in any mock drafts. It wasn't really on my radar at all, but I looked into his profile. 7 interceptions last year for the Bears. Then I think he has 12 total in the last 3 years. So lots of ball production available in the later rounds. Is that
good size? 6 foot, 200, and ran a 4.5, 40 at the combine. Mike Tomlin does love the interception totals in college. I mean, he thinks that plays at the NFL level. I mean, I've heard him talk about guys like Kevin Byard, the former Titans and Eagles safety. I've sat there in the press conference room on a Tomlin Tuesday, and he says, we almost drafted this guy. We should have drafted this guy. He picked off a bunch of passes at Middle Tennessee. We should have known he was going to get his hands on the ball in the NFL. That works out sometimes. I remember, way back before I was on the beat, who was the 7th rounder from Louisville, Gerard Holloman, safety, who I think he led the NCAA in interceptions, and he never became anything. He had athletic limitations at the NFL level and probably no true fit. So, I mean, that can backfire as well if you put too much stock into that. But, yeah, I mean, seven picks jumps out for sure. I tend to think that's not coincidental. And Williams also had 2 and 3 the previous 2 seasons as well across his time at Cal and UNLV.
Yeah, and I think the ball skills definitely matter across from Joey Porter Jr. because that's the one thing we've been talking about with him. Going back to when the Steelers drafted him, there's a lot to like about what he does in terms of coverage and locking guys up. But he's never, at Penn State or with the Steelers, been the guy who's going to generate a ton of turnovers. Does that, for you, turn up the emphasis a little bit on a guy like Noel Williams to get into day 2, maybe early day 3, and say, hey, here's a guy who's just got a knack for the ball. We're not going to rely too much on him to be like that number 2 every down outside corner, but there's different ways that we can use that in this defense, a guy that has that level of anticipation.
Possibly. I just think the Steelers simply have bigger needs than corner right now. I mean, I'm not giving up on Corey Trice Jr. just yet. We know that Darius Slay is going to be opposite Joey Porter Jr. this season unless something really goes sideways there. So I'd be looking more for values on day 3 of this draft, and with his numbers and everything we just outlined there, I don't know that Noel Williams from Cal is going to slip that far. If he does, then yeah, I mean, at some point you start to prioritize, all right, how much do we need that running back that we haven't taken yet? Can we get a good one still in the 5th round? Should we use this 4th round pick on a corner we didn't expect to be there? Those will be the calculations that Omar Khan is making come noonish on Saturday.
Brian, in terms of the offensive tackles in this draft, I've seen it's kind of been out of nowhere in some of these mocks, but there has been a trend of sending the Steelers a tackle higher and higher and higher. I believe there was one USA Today mock this week that had the Steelers going that direction in round 1. I was like, have you watched the last couple drafts with Troy Fautanu?
Might set a record
Broderick
if
Jones?
they draft a tackle in the first round, 3 consecutive. It'd be like, was it the Lions drafted a receiver, top 10, like 3 years in a row? It was Mike Williams, Charles Rogers, and maybe Roy Williams, I think, was their famous streak back in the day.
Yeah, something like that. And let me ask the question this way, Brian. How early is too early for this? I think depth tackle is the word that we're using, but maybe it's someone, if things don't work out with Broderick Jones, a guy that you look at that could reasonably challenge Broderick Jones, become maybe what Dan Moore was from a veteran perspective, as more of a rookie perspective of challenging Broderick Jones in a similar way, but from less tenure.
I mean, I think you're looking at, again, probably the third day of the draft is when you'd start to actually consider, okay, maybe it's best player available time within reason. But, if that would be, to me, if you check off D-line and probably running back in those first 2 days, and then you're like, okay, all the work we've done on quarterbacks, we don't really want to use our 4th-round pick on Kyle McCord or Quinn Ewers. So maybe we can get a little bit flexible here, and we think this tackle that's available is a really good player, could play anywhere on the line. And yeah, you said if things go wrong with Broderick Jones, Adam, what if things go wrong with Troy Fautanu? I mean, that could happen as well, either health related or just making the transition from college to the NFL or the left side to the right side. We just haven't seen it yet with him. Now, that said, I certainly don't think they are going to kick in throw in the towel on Troy Fautanu just yet, that they would take a tackle in the first round and say, well, we're moving Fautanu to guard. I don't have any indication that they're remotely thinking that, so I don't understand that draft projection. But it is the internet in 2025, and you can pretty much find anything you want on there.
Well, they love. Everything I've heard is the Steelers love Fautanu. Thought he might have been their best offensive lineman last season if he stayed healthy. So I guess that's why I bring up Broderick Jones as more the case.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, either one, both have a lot to prove this season for different reasons, and they're at different stages of their development. But I mean, neither guy has exactly solidified much of anything, and the Steelers re-signed Calvin Anderson to be the swing tackle. I think Spencer Anderson, even though he's become more of a guard, could probably help out at right tackle in a pinch. So, don't do anything outlandish on the O-line. You should at least be able to buy yourself another year of watching, assessing, evaluating these guys, and you hope they turn into the bookends, and we're not having this conversation for another 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, but when we get to the draft, you do have to have that conversation of what are the options, and how soon is too soon. And was Dan Moore a 4th?
Yeah, he was.
So that fits right with what you're saying. Maybe a guy who can be the next Dan Moore.
And I don't think anybody thought he was going to have to step in and start right away like he did, but we know that things went awry on that front.
Yes, and speaking of people, I forgot to make this point when we were talking about Noel Williams and the cornerback situation. What is your read on how they feel about Corey Trice? Because my perception is that he's one of those guys that has the most disparate inside-outside perception of. I think a lot of people outside think of him as a non-entity.
Yeah.
But my perception has always been that they really love him and really want to give him every chance to succeed.
And that's fair, because if I were looking at a random team's depth chart, say the Seattle Seahawks, and I see that they've got 2 starting corners on the outside and then a 7th-round pick from a couple years ago who's played in about 4 career games, I would consider that person a non-entity as well. But with Trice, we know how much they thought they landed a steal in him in the 7th round in that 2023 draft. I'd heard from people in the organization they really liked him as a rookie and wish he wouldn't have gone down with that torn ACL early in training camp. And he can't catch a break injury-wise. Even last year, a groin or hamstring severely limited him again for a large portion of the season. So maybe he never will be able to stay on the field. When he did get out there, he had a rough time trying to stick with Jamar Chase in Cincinnati in Week 18, but who wouldn't in Trice's defense? So I still think there's something there. Is he running out of time? Sure, everybody is in year 3 of a 4-year rookie deal when you were a late-round pick, but I wouldn't just completely discount his ability to still help, still contribute, still become something. Although we know that Darius Slay is going to be blocking his path to an outside cornerback slot unless one of those guys can, find a niche somehow on the inside in certain packages.
Yeah, but Darius Slay is older, and maybe, I'm sure you're going to see some level of Corey Trice, just even if Darius Slay is healthy. You got to mix him in to stay fresh, and at this point in Darius Slay's career. So, yeah, I think that's such an interesting conversation because we have to talk about the quarterbacks so much. It's one of those things you don't really get into as much as maybe you'd like, but they seem to like him a lot, and I think that's when we talk about cornerbacks, it's probably a reason that, like you said, that it's going to have to be like a best player available situation where they really love a guy.
And they try to bolster the roster to a point where they can always do that. If there's a tight end that they love in round 4, it's like, okay, well, we don't have too many glaring needs. We can take this guy because we believe in him. And what does that mean for Darnell Washington? What does that mean for Connor Hayward or Pat Freiermuth? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But we think this guy's really good, and he's one of our kind of guys. He's a Steeler. So when you don't have a bunch of holes up and down your depth chart, relative holes, I'm not suggesting the Steelers are a Super Bowl contender who can make luxury picks left and right, certainly in the first 2 picks that they have. But as you get into day 3, they sort of did that last year, Adam, with Mason McCormick. I don't think any of us had interior offensive linemen high on the list after they took Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier. But, they had done enough. They thought that, yeah, it's time to take this guy who we just really like from South Dakota State, and he's going to be a starter for us down the line.
Yeah, and he became useful, I think, a lot faster than people expected. But, Brian, we're going to leave it there for this week. This is it. This is the final Steelers mock draft tracker.
We almost got a guest appearance from Post-Gazette music critic and writer Scott Mervis and fantasy football aficionado. I'm sure if we asked him over, he'd have plenty of hot takes. But he also is now here at Mike's Beer Bar. You can run into famous music critics when you come down here.
He just stepped in, and you should as well, folks, watching the show. Next week, like we said at the top of the show, we'll be here Thursday and Friday, breaking down the draft from the Steelers' perspective. So if you can come down. If you can't, watch our show, because we're going to be talking about things from a Steelers' perspective pretty much the whole time. We'll talk about, the division opponents. We'll maybe talk a little bit of Pitt and Penn State. But listen, when they only talk about the Steelers for like 1/30 of the time on these big shows, and they do a great job. But if you want Steelers perspective, we're going to be starting at 8, and we're going to be talking about the Steelers through that lens. So either come on down, subscribe to the channel. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. But otherwise, we will talk to you again next week from right here at Mike's Beer Bar.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.